In a world riddled with war, mass atrocities, and totalitarianism, the works of Fyodor Dostoevsky are more relevant than ever. Dostoevsky is one of the greatest authors to have ever lived. His understanding of the human psyche was unparalleled for his time and reflected in the complexity of his characters. Much of his writing explores the themes of evil, freedom, and the limits of intellectualism. Influencing thinkers like Nietzsche, Jean Paul Sartre, and George Orwell, Dostoevsky pioneered new literary genres while also inspiring the modern understanding of psychology. Notably, Sigmund Freud credited him as his predecessor. He captivated readers with gripping narratives that combined profound inquiries into faith, suffering, and the meaning of life. These deep insights into human psychology were no doubt drawn from his troubled personal life. Born on November 11, 1821, on the outskirts of Moscow, Dostoevsky came from a comfortably well-off family. His father was a doctor at a charitable hospital that served the poor, and this gave him early exposure to harsh realities. His parents possessed contrasting personalities, with his father being austere and strict, while his mother was gentle and nurturing. This contrast between uncompromised severity and unbounded forgiveness and love became a central theme in Dostoevsky's writing. Although the family was legally classified as nobility, they didn't enjoy the social status typically associated with that rank. His mother's family had some prestige as in the merchant class, but they weren't socially elevated in Russian society. Adding to these pressures, Dostoevsky's father struggled mentally with routinely performing surgery, and this darkened his disposition to life and his family. An undisclosed nervous disorder, the stress of his job, and even the weather all exacerbated chronic headaches, which led to fits and sporadic rage. His alcohol use also contributed to mood swings that caused melancholy and despondency. The upbringing at home was a severe environment for Dostoevsky. His father demanded the highest standards from his children and imposed strict discipline. For example, every afternoon, the household had to be completely silent while his father napped, and even the slightest noise resulted in severe punishment. This tyrannical behavior extended to mundane daily routines, such as swatting of flies away while he napped. The environment was humorless and cold. Despite this, all 8 children received a superior education. As the second oldest boy, Dostoevsky grew up with his older brother Mikhail. The family owned a summer estate outside the city, but much of their early years were spent in Moscow, living in the physician's residence on the grounds of the Mariinsky Hospital, where his father worked as a doctor. Their environment here of sick and impoverished patients all around contributed to Dostoevsky's later writing, and from a young age he gravitated to literature, fables, and the Bible. At age 12, shortly before his mother's death from tuberculosis, he left for school in Moscow. There he felt out of place among his more aristocratic peers. Unlike some of his contemporaries like Tolstoy or Turgenev, who came from the gentry, Dostoevsky was not born into privilege. He constantly grappled with financial difficulties and the pressure to publish his works quickly and earn money quickly. These pressures contributed to the frenetic energy of his novels. In them, he explored the lives of accidental families and the insulted and the humiliating, highlighting the realities of his upbringing. While at school, his father died. Dostoevsky's father genuinely loved his wife, and after her death, he was inconsolable. He withdrew into seclusion and was generally irritable with his surviving children. His anger often manifested as abuse towards his serfs, which may have contributed to his untimely death 2 years later. He was found murdered, and the circumstances surrounding his death caused suspicion that his serfs had sought revenge. Dostoevsky and his older brother were forced to abandon their academic pursuits at this time and attend a military engineering school in St. Petersburg, where the education was free. Unlike his brother, Dostoevsky gained admission, although he was far from enthusiastic about it. He held little interest in subjects like math, science, engineering, or the military in general. and his philosophical obstinance set him apart from his peers. After graduating, Dostoevsky worked as an engineer, but fell into gambling, a habit that haunted him throughout his life. During this time, Dostoevsky's journey into the world of literature began, first by translating the works of other authors. His first novella, Poor Folk, catapulted him into fame and earned him critical praise. Despite this success, his shyness and vanity led to hostility among his intellectual peers. He was satirically referred to as the Knight of Doleful Countenance. Already prone to nervous illness, he slipped into depression. In 1847, he joined a group of intellectuals exploring utopian socialism, and later a secret revolutionary group. His motivation stemmed from opposing serfdom rather than embracing communism or terrorism. In 1849, he was arrested with fellow members, leading to a mock execution. He narrowly escaped a firing squad and instead received a 4-year sentence of forced labor in western Siberia. Dostoevsky experienced a transformation of faith in the Gulag, gaining a deeper appreciation for common people and the Russian Orthodox faith. Despite facing initial hostility from fellow inmates due to his noble background, this eventually softened, and his outlook on life became spiritual in their presence. After serving his time in the labor camps and enduring an additional 6 years of exile, Dostoevsky returned to Petersburg and penned The House of the Dead. This novel accounts for the harrowing experiences he bore witness to, and underscores the wide range of human behavior present in the labor camp. For example, Dostoevsky vividly recalls the ruthless brutality of the guards and their disturbing delight in committing heinous acts. He reflects on the crimes perpetrated by the convicted criminals and the surprising existence of good and decent individuals among the hardened felons. However, he also expresses astonishment at some convicts' ability to commit murders without the slightest pang of regret. It was during his time in prison that he began to experience epileptic seizures, which would become a lifelong affliction. From these dramatic events, Dostoevsky formed the basis of his philosophy on the human condition. In 1857, after being released, Dostoevsky found himself in an unhappy marriage, which began with his wife witnessing one of his seizures during their honeymoon. He became deeply involved in literary endeavors and co-edited influential journals with his older brother, which faced government censorship. These journals collapsed after Mikhail's death in 1865. Dostoevsky transitioned from a middle-of-the-road stance to a critique of the radicals he once supported, who were predominant in the Russian intelligentsia. He strongly disapproved of their materialism, utilitarian morality, reduction of art to propaganda, and their denial of individual freedom and responsibility. This perspective held throughout his life and made his post-Siberian works controversial in the eyes of the Soviet regime. In Notes from the Underground in 1864, Dostoevsky's unnamed narrator challenges the belief of liberals and radicals, asserting that the pursuit of discovering psychological laws and deterministic worldviews undermines individual freedom. In the novel's second part, the underground man lashes out by being purely anti-conformist, often performing contrary actions out of sheer spite. This underscores the limitations of an irrational nature as a response to an impossible clash of ideas. On one hand, there were the ideals of the Russian government, and on the other, the common struggle of its citizens who found themselves in an impossible situation between idealism and the reality of their poverty and lack of real freedom. Look no further than the common practice of serfdom, which Dostoevsky railed against in his earlier works. The novella satirized the utopian fiction of the day and grappled with the disconnect between intellectualism and the reality of the common person's existence. During the 1860s, Dostoevsky spent much of his time in Western Europe, where he exhibited a mixture of admiration and disdain for the society's culture and materialism. His motivations included a romantic interest in a fellow author, escaping creditors in Russia, and a dangerous attraction to gambling. At this time, he wrote The Gambler in 1866, which was very much based on the experiences and the psychology of compulsive gambling. After his tryst, he married his stenographer, Anna Grigorievna Snitkina, who brought stability to his life and finances and allowed him to focus on further writings. Much credit has to be given to Anna for being present and helping Dostoevsky with his most significant works. There's a lot of evidence that she was instrumental in the development of his writing and the subsequent greatness of the following works that came from it. Written concurrently with The Gambler, Crime and Punishment in 1866 tells the story of a young intellectual willing to gamble his fortune on intellectual ideas he learned from school. He ends up rationalizing the murder of an old pawnbroker to meet his immediate needs, and is driven by utilitarian and nihilistic philosophies. The novel delves into the complex motives behind the crime and the subsequent psychological torment that comes from these actions. Ultimately, the student repents and confesses, and the novel shows a transition from amoral theories to a genuine repentance, which became debated among critics, whether this was, actually possible, or whether it was just Dostoevsky kind of leaning into his Christianity. In his next work, The Idiot, from 1868 to 69, Dostoevsky aimed to portray a perfectly good man, Prince Mishkin, in a psychologically convincing manner. The journey of the character of Mishkin, characterized by generosity and innocence, explores many topics through its other characters, including art, death, nature's meaningless, and true happiness. As a character committed to Christ-like goodness, Mishkin stresses the limit of if someone like this could ever even actually exist. And with the title of The Idiot seeming to be tongue-in-cheek, the reader is left to wonder if altruism is simply a fool's gambit, always to be exploited by the upper class and those with more grit. In the last decade of his life, Dostoevsky authored The Possessed in 1872, which earned him the enduring animosity of intellectual elites at the time. This work intertwines two plots, one featuring a man marked by inner emptiness and a history of embracing and discarding various ideologies, and the other revolving around a revolutionary leader whose actions are rooted in violence and rebellion. Dostoevsky's portrayal of these two characters' ideologies and their willingness to commit murder reflects his increasing conservative and Christian values and emphasizes the danger of materialistic, ideologically driven societies. His final and arguably greatest novel, The Brothers Karamazov, from 1879 to 80, explores profound theological and philosophical themes such as the origin of evil, the nature of freedom, and the yearning for faith. The narrative revolves around the Karamazov family, notably the profligate Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov and his sons. It is here that we can reflect back on the nature of Dostoevsky's own father and start to see some inspiration. The novel delves into the themes of morality, guilt, and redemption, with the intellectual Ivan representing skepticism and the concept of theodicy. Basically, the idea that the church should become the state and rule over everybody. So you're almost eliminating separation of church and state, and you're just replacing the state with the church. The book is best known for its chapters Rebellion and specifically the Grand Inquisitor, which presents compelling arguments against God and religion, ultimately serving to strengthen the defense of Christianity. In the remarkable episode of the Grand Inquisitor, Ivan converses with a devil who offers arguments against faith in the church while illuminating the banality of evil. In the chapter Jesus returns to earth during the Spanish Inquisition, despite performing miracles and blessings, the Grand Inquisitor has Jesus arrested. As a representative of the church, the Grand Inquisitor visits Jesus in his prison cell and informs him that his presence is no longer necessary. In a lengthy monologue, He argues that the church controls people through security and mystery and provides them with what they desire and better meets their needs than Jesus ever can. He basically says, look, we make them happy. Strong people might be able to understand a willful life and making all the correct decisions, but we provide the order for them. For the majority of people, simply the structure of the church is a better way forward than this kind of like individual morality Jesus sort of embodies as an idea and as a divine entity and as a theological idea. So Jesus becomes obsolete, basically. And again, it's this theater, but it's a fun idea today, and for the day, I think Dostoevsky wrote it. It was a very provocative idea. In the end, Jesus responds with a gentle kiss and leaves, and the Inquisitor asks him never to return. And that kind of caps off. I mean, that's really probably the highlights of Dostoevsky's career, but one of the greatest authors to have ever lived. Just profound exploration of the human mind, philosophy, morality. And I think his personal experiences and his unique upbringing really informed his creative genius and his ability to shape the literary landscape in ways that continue to captivate readers and scholars. His ability to delve into the deepest recesses of the human heart had immense, ramifications on other fields, such as psychology. His insight into political problems, from censorship to diametrically opposed ideological camps that all, play a part to the kind of the real struggle of the common person. He's just more relevant, I think, than any other author. And everyone can argue they're greatest, but he's definitely he's got to be top three. His novels were really propelled by ideas, and they were timeless, timeless philosophical and political ideas. I think he's got to be regarded as one of the greatest novelists in history. And you could go on about his influences, modernism, existentialism, psychology, theology, morality. It really goes on and on. But his uncanny ability to predict the future and also the behavior of Russia's revolutionaries in his time was, I think, the most telling thing. Anybody who's sort of prescient like that, but is also relevant in their time, it just shows they got their finger on their pulse, like they're on the right track. And I'll just end here with my kind of love letter to Dostoevsky. But Sigmund Freud, who I mentioned at the beginning, cited Dostoevsky as a huge influence, and he also attempted to apply his psychoanalytic techniques to Dostoevsky's work. But I think they have to be inadequate somehow. And I think Dostoevsky's characters kind of defy psychoanalysis. And they're so complex and multi-layered that it really comes out that Dostoevsky himself emerges as a fellow psychologist in some ways. And unlike Freud, who has to create a model, he's capable of creating these independent, intricate characters who all exist in the complicated realm of psychology, morality, philosophy, theology, and somehow defy his models and become more real than them.